Well, this is going to be a very, very free-form kind of a panel, and we were going to start off with the Nationals and why we didn't get that last strike, but we're going to be timely, and we're going to talk about the passing yesterday of Marvin Miller, and I think Tom Boswell wrote a wonderful column, and as a starting point, Tom, I want you to talk about Marvin Miller.
When Marvin came on the scene in 1966 as the baseball union leader, the average salary in Major League Baseball was $7,000 for a beginning player. When I started, and I hate to repeat my column, but I'll repeat a little of it, the first team I covered was the tail end of the 1975 Orioles and the 1976 Orioles, and Brooks Robinson was right at the end of his career then. And he had made actually less than $900,000 in 23 years as one of the greatest ball players who ever lived. And his business that he was going to have after he retired was a small sporting goods store in Baltimore. He was not even the whole owner, just part owner of it. He did not like to collect from high school teams, junior high school teams who were a little bit late on their equipment. And he went bankrupt, I believe in 1976. First year of the union, first year of free agency, ironically, too late for him. So one of my first stories for George was Brooks Robinson's gone bankrupt. So Brooks blamed himself for not being a tough enough businessman. He felt terrible about it. I think anyone with a different perspective from outside baseball might have said, well, maybe Brooks should have made 10 or 20 or 30 times that much, and maybe one minor mistake shouldn't have made Brooks Robinson bankrupt. Well, sadly to me, they had to sort of bail Brooks out. At one point, a Baltimore lawyer helped him with his bankruptcy, and he wanted to pay the lawyer, Ron Shapiro, back. And Ron wouldn't take anything from Brooks. He wouldn't take this golden glove that Brooks offered to him. And so Brooks snuck up to his house one day and left the golden glove on the doorstep in front of the house and ran away. To me, Marvin Miller is the person who saw the absolute injustice of almost 100 years of that, up to 1975. And I don't think, we're going to see guys go broke, we're going to see ball players make too much money, but what Marvin did was see the outrage of that and correct it by fighting a step of the way until he had gotten the reserve clause abolished. And we're never going to see a story that sad again. The ball player who goes broke now will do it on the merits.
And there won't be more than one. Tim, you were on the Veterans Committee for the Hall of Fame, and you relayed to me the story that Marvin Miller missed out getting into the Hall of Fame by one vote.
Right, and I thought he was going to make it that year, and I think he should be a Hall of Famer because to me, the Hall of Fame is a museum that chronicles the history of the game, and you simply cannot write the history of the game without Marvin Miller. He is as important and as integral a part of the game as almost anyone over the last 50 years at least. As Boz said, 1976, the average salary was $52,000 a year. Now it's $3.5 million a year. And the revenues have gone up at the same rate. But the reason he's not in, and the reason he didn't get in on the committee that I was on, is there are ownership and executives on those committees who will never vote for him because they believe that he ruined the game by raising the salaries the way that he did. The way that he stuck up for player rights ruined the game in the minds of a lot of these executives, which I find totally unfair. In the end, Marvin Miller beat the owners, and they're taking it out on him by not voting for him for the Hall of Fame, and I think that's a mistake.
And Jane, you wrote this wonderful book on Mickey Mantle and knew him as well as any writer and, saw, what he was going through in the latter part of his life when he was, struggling to make a buck.
And just to chime in with Boz and Tim, I talked to Marvin about both Sandy Koufax and Mickey. And it won't surprise you to know that Sandy Koufax, who is as left-wing a person as there is in this universe, not just this university, was very pro-union, and the holdout that he and Don Drysdale staged in the spring of 1966, Marvin said was one of the most significant, steps taken by which it showed the power of two, which was what needed to be demonstrated to the players to understand, for them to understand the power of hundreds. But he was very surprised. He approached Mickey Mantle near the end of his career and asked for him to not announce that he was retiring because the Yankees had asked him not to announce he was retiring because they wanted him for season ticket sales. The union wanted him for the purpose of having his support for negotiations. And, Mickey Mantle grew up in a rigidly anti-union mining town in Oklahoma, where people, hated unions more than, the ownership of baseball hated unions. And to Marvin's absolute surprise, Mickey agreed to help him out. And the reason he agreed to help him out, he said, is if it's going to help the other players, I'll do it. And what Marvin said was that he talked to Mickey about his own career and how little he had made, how much he had to struggle to get to that mythical $100,000 salary, which he did after Willie Mays. And Mickey got that if it had come earlier, it would have made a huge difference. If it had come earlier that there was education about alcoholism, if there had been any provision at all for education about addiction, Mickey Mantle might have not basically committed suicide the way he did, because he killed himself with drinking. So you look at guys like Koufax and Mantle and you say, what if they had lived 10 years later? What if they had lived 20 years later? What if Marvin Miller had been in their lives? Would have been a very different story.
Kevin, would you please put Marvin Miller in the context of history in all of sports, not just baseball?
Well, being a former economics writer, the first thing that jumped out to me was the impact he had on distancing athletic stars from everyday society. I mean, you hear stories about how people who grew up in Brooklyn with the Dodgers lived next door to them, would see them at the meat market buying a slab of steak. Marvin Miller's impact, though righteous, increased the salaries of ball players from 1966 when he took it over, which was three times the salary of the average working American, to in 1982, I think he retired, he had boosted it to 20 times the average salary of the average working American. So the distancing, now that we have athletes living in gated communities, you don't see them out. They don't have to work in the off season because they make such fabulous amounts of money, is in part due to Marvin Miller's work with the union and his work with the proletariat in baseball, which obviously at some point transcended into football and basketball and all other pro sports. And he really picked up the charge of, as a lot of people know, Curt Flood, and what he stood for in the 1960s in terms of trying to free himself from the reserve clause. So to me, that's where, that's a place in history where Marvin Miller stands, and Tim's absolutely right. It's a shame that he's not in the Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, but I think part of the reason is because the Cooperstown is less museum than it is a shrine. And by that I mean most of Cooperstown is to remember the great things about the game of baseball. And so to have Marvin Miller in there would not be, I don't think, in large part for people in baseball, a good memory. It's just like having Cap Anson's enshrinement in Cooperstown, but not have his plaque include the fact that he was a baseball player who in the 1880s drew the color line and brought baseball to its horrible half-century plus life of keeping people of African descent out of the game.
Eduardo, much to my chagrin, you're not much older than most of the players you cover. And did you get a sense in your coverage of the Orioles and before that the Rays in Tampa that the players understood just what Miller meant?
I think it's interesting because just like looking on Twitter yesterday and the day before, you see a lot of players really tweeting about how much he meant. But I think it is a shame. I think a big part of it is because he's not in the Hall of Fame. Is that I think that there's an entire generation of player now that has passed that era that really didn't even grow up even knowing that much about that whole time period and about all the strides that were made there. So from my perspective, you really didn't hear much about Marvin in clubhouses. You don't hear that much about obviously the everything that he did. But I think it's more because, like you said, the players are younger now, and that's an entire generation of players that are now used to that. They're used to free agency, and they're used to growing up, and the players that they looked at and idolized, they knew that too. So I think in some ways it's the young player today might not be as educated on a lot of the history of the past. You do get some players who really are involved in that, and I've covered a few, and those are actually a lot of interesting guys because they'll sit down with you and they'll talk to you about the history of the game, and you can tell that they're more than just playing for per se the fame or the money or anything like that. But I would say that for the most part, a lot of the young players nowadays really don't grasp the meaning.
Thom, how have the ball players changed over the years that you've covered?
Well, they've changed in the sense that, sort of like what Kevin alluded to, that the distance between the average person and ball players, just in 20 years the minimum salaries of ball players, I think, has gone probably in that period from maybe $90,000 a year to, I think it's $400,000 now. I remember sitting in the Orioles clubhouse, and Jimmy Myers was back at a bullpen relief pitcher, and not the sharpest pencil in the box. And he's sitting there reading the stock pages, and I said to another writer, I said, "This is kind of funny, isn't it? Him reading the stock pages," until I realized that he made 10 times the amount of money that I made. That's the biggest difference.
I appreciate all your insights on Marvin Miller, but one of the reasons that this auditorium is as full as I've ever seen it, even for an exam, is people want to know from Boz and Tim and the rest of you guys and Jane, was that a strike that Storin threw? I mean, most of the people here need some therapy, Boz, and that's first of all, it's one of the reasons the Nationals didn't send anyone. They want to forget it and move on. We don't.
Yeah, I need some therapy on that last game, the last inning of the last game too. I went back to look after Michael Morse hit the home run to put them up 6-0. Their chances of winning were 96%. When the 9th inning began, their chances were still 89%. So you could say that the players and Davey had managed them still to a fabulous position. By the time Molina came up, not with 2 strikes, just with came to bat, the odds were back to 96%. Even the nerd sites don't have the odds when it went to 2 strikes. It was probably 99 point something. The third strike to Molina was not a third strike. It missed clearly. The freeze-checked swing, I've looked at it a few.
He calls it a strike and nobody says a word, right?
It was probably that much short of a swing. He probably checked his swing by 2 inches. So that's how close it was. If there was any problem in the way those 2 hitters were pitched, I don't think Drew Storin understood that his own nervous system would make a 2-2 pitch feel like a 3-2 pitch, and a 3-2 pitch in that situation feel like something he'd never done before. And the result was he threw two 2-2 pitches that were just a little bit more off the plate than he normally would have put them. They were able to take them, and both 3-2 pitches missed badly. And if you're going to look for two pitches where pressure, inexperience hit, it was those 2 3-2 pitches, and that's what changed the whole dynamic of that inning. And people have asked me, what's the impact going to be on the team from blowing a 6-run lead? And that's tough because there are really only 2 players on the team, 2 people on the team, who bear any significant responsibility for that. All the hitters in the lineup have good things to remember. Worth led off the game with a double. He won the game the night before with a home run. Harper had a triple and a home run. Zimmerman had a home run and a double. LaRoche had 2 homers in the series. Morse hit the home run that night. Suzuki had the hit. They're all off the hook. There were no defensive screw-ups. Even the relievers. Jackson gives up a run and Clippard gives up a run. 2 people. Gio Gonzalez is a 21-game winner. He's got a 6-0 lead, and he can't throw strikes. That's nerves. Davey stuck with him. There was a situation where Molina came up and could have tied the game 6-6, and Davey left Gio in so he had a chance to keep his dignity. And Gio escaped. He got out. He gets to say, I went 5, but Gio has to bear something. And poor Storen did not look nervous. Gio looked really nervous.
Tim?
Yeah.
Enough
Go.
with you.
Okay.
You've done nothing for me.
Yeah, I went back and watched the 9th inning again, and those were not strikes, and I'm sorry. And after the game, I went into the Cardinal clubhouse, and I won't use the guy's name, but he's a very well-known player. Lance Berkman told me. Lance Berkman is like the greatest guy in the world. He's so funny. He's so insightful. And I didn't use this because it wasn't necessary at the moment. But he said, if that game is played in June, they beat us 7-1. But they've never been here before, and we could see it in their eyes. And he said they were tight from the 5th inning on. And he said, Gio let us back in the game. And even though they tacked on a run in the 9th, it was too late by then. We were already in the game. And I was literally 40 feet from home plate for that 9th inning. And I'm looking in the Cardinals dugout, and I've never seen anything like it. They were absolutely certain before that inning started that they were going to win the game. And then they went out and won. So as bad as it was, and it was excruciating beyond words, I've never seen anything like that 24-hour period. The greatest win Washington team has had in 79 years, and the worst loss they've had in 85 years within a 24-hour period. I've been doing this my whole life. I've never seen anything like that. And yet, sorry, you have to have one of these horrible signature losses like that if you're going to advance as an organization. And that's essentially what Lance Berkman was saying, is we know how to win these games because we've been there so many times. He essentially said, wait till this team figures it out. Then they're going to be great, because their talent level is really high. But now, the next time Drew Storen goes out there, he's going to say, God damn it, that's never going to happen to me again, because it's happened to him once, and it's not going to happen again. I think it's going to work for them eventually, as opposed to against them.
I wanted to ask Tim, do teams and fan bases sort of meld together through bad defeats? If you breeze through like the Marlins did a couple times and win the World Series, is that even good for franchises or fan bases?
I think so. And anyone who was there that night, I've never seen a reaction like that. I've never seen that kind of excitement turn into that kind of horror. And I looked in that Nationals clubhouse in the bottom of the 9th, and it wasn't there. It wasn't like the Cardinal dugout in the top of the 9th. So yes, all those fans who went through that someday are going to tell their children and their grandchildren, I was at that game, and you know what that led to? That's the reason we won the World Series 2 or 3 years later, something
Jane,
like
what
that.
would Shirley Povich have written about the 9th inning?
Oy. I think Shirley might have raised the question that I've been asking, maybe you two guys. Why did he throw him in the 8-0 game? I mean, to me, if you're going to have the argument, which I'm sure we're going to have tonight, about Strasburg and sitting him down, Drew Storen also had been injured and out part of the year. So why do you bring him in that 8-0 game when you know you're going to need him really need him in the next ones? And that is where I fault Davey.
That's the place you can second guess him, but there had been a long multiple-day layoff there. So he's torn between keeping him sharp. He only threw like 14 pitches in that game. But yes, it ended up that he threw a lot more pitches in 3 days than he had thrown in a week before that.
Kevin, you followed the team as well as anyone. What would you have done those last 3 innings? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, I did my all for the Nats. I mean, I grew up not far from here, and, students ask me from time to time, as a sports writer, do you lose your zest as a fan? I'll just explain it like this. When the Nats made the playoffs, my best friend and I, we got some scalpers tickets to make sure we could go to that game on a Wednesday night or Wednesday afternoon. And we went, and they lost. And then we got tickets for the Friday night game. And I was doing ESPN 980 from the stadium. And after I was done, my friend called me and he said, "You know what? We shouldn't go to the game because we're the reason they lost Wednesday." So we retired to a watering hole at a nearby hotel and watched that game. And as a DC fan, sports fan, I was at the Capitals game when they got blown out by the Penguins in the semifinal Game 7 at the Verizon Center. I was there covering that game and seething the whole time. And in 1979, I watched our local football team here in D.C. Go into Dallas in first place in the NFC East and play a fabulous game with Riggins having a 66-yard touchdown run, Clint Didier going down the sidelines on a great run, blowing a fourth-quarter lead, and not only losing the division lead to the Cowboys, but also getting knocked out of the playoffs because of an outrageous tiebreaker between the Cardinals and the Bears, where one team or the other had to win by like 40 points, and did. So it knocked Washington out of first place and out of the playoffs. And I'll just say, I had never been more devastated as a fan until that game that night. And
Eduardo, we'll get to you in a minute and your O's. So just hold on. So one more. Thom, you were doing a radio show that Monday after the Nationals were eliminated. What was the tone of your callers?
Well, what I tried to talk about, and what some people really had by that point, since it was 3 or 4 days since that game, was the idea that, hey, 10 years ago, you'd be sitting at home watching teams from 2 other cities play in the baseball playoffs. There was baseball in Washington, and there was playoff baseball in Washington. So by the time Monday came around, there was the idea that the next best thing to playing and winning is playing and losing. And people were, I know there's a lot of people who still act as if they're hurt, but the calls that we got.
Still act.
Okay. No act. But still, the notion that the whole experience took place had also settled in at that point, I thought.
Most people here would disagree, which is why they're here. So, Eduardo, you covered the Orioles, and they had a magical run as well, and they lost in 5 games to the Yankees. Why don't you share some of that with us?
Well, I remember going down to Sarasota in February. It was my first year covering the team, and or even back when I left my old paper, the St. Petersburg Times, and I remember a lot of people telling me, well, good luck covering another last place team. So, and I even remember in spring training, and they brought 30 pitchers to spring training, and you really know what their rotation was, you didn't know what their bullpen was. You knew their lineup for the most part, but there were so many questions. And one of the things that Buck Showalter did was, he used this really immaculate complex in Sarasota. And to anyone who's ever kind of gone to spring training and gone through Sarasota when the Reds left Sarasota, it was probably one of the worst complexes in the Grapefruit League. It was just a disgrace. But the team put a lot of money, and the city of Sarasota put a lot of money into just totally rebuilding. It was just beautiful. It was a beautiful complex, and the one thing that Buck used from day one is that this is a part of not using anything as an excuse. That here we are, we've got this great complex. We don't have excuses. And also he used a team that I covered before, the Tampa Bay Rays, is another example of we're not going to use the idea that you can't win in the American League East as an excuse, because they obviously did it with a much smaller payroll than the Yankees and the Red Sox. So back then, I'll admit that I probably thought a lot of that was just kind of a lot of talk. But once they started off really well, and you could, even now it's kind of hard to explain how they were able to do this throughout the whole season. But in a lot of ways, it is inexplainable. Like the one stat that everyone always uses is the run differential stat. That for most of the year they had negative run differential, which for all the stat experts, that's kind of the qualifier of a good team is run differential, and they had a negative run differential throughout the whole season pretty much. I think they ended with like a +7 run differential at the end of the year. But I think a lot of it had to do with their manager and the fact that he really kept them on an even keel throughout the season. Obviously, 162 games, a long season, and I remember going to Texas in that wild card game, still not believing in them, still not believing that they were gonna. I thought they were gonna lose 8-1 there because every time that the Rangers beat them, it would be like 12-3. Josh Hamilton hit 4 homers in one game, and Adrian Beltre hit 3 homers in one game, and they were just launching balls out of Camden Yards. So I thought they were done. But then you put a guy like Joe Saunders on the mound, and he gave him 6-7 good innings and let the bullpen go from there. And I remember the look on Buck's face just kind of walking out of the dugout. He looked like a proud dad, and to him, he's a proud man. And part of it was a little bit special to him too that it was in Texas too, for obvious reasons. But it was obviously a fun year to cover them, and that 5-game series in New York. If a ball hits off a foul pole in right field in Yankee Stadium, maybe it's a little different. I think it did hit the foul pole, but it was obviously an unexpected year.
Tom, what's next for both the Nationals and the Orioles?
Well, I think Timmy said it right about the Nats. I tell people, if this was enjoyable and excruciating to you, you might as well get used to it because they're going to be in the playoffs for a while. I mean, and people would say, well, like when Davey Johnson managed the Mets, they didn't really get to the World Series or the playoffs as much as they should have, but it's easier now. You can't make those same comparisons. There's 2 wild card spots where there were none back then. I find it difficult to believe that in the next 4 or 5 years that there will be better teams, that many better teams ahead of the Nationals in terms of getting a shot at the playoffs. So I think the Nats are entering what is probably going to be a great era of baseball. The Orioles, I don't know what they did this year. I don't know how they did it this year. And I still don't know if they're going in the right direction or not. I can't say in the same thing about that as I would the Nationals. But the notion that there were, I think, 5 million people in the Baltimore, Washington area that went to see Major League Baseball this year, that's a good direction.
Boz, talk about the Nationals and the Orioles.
Yeah, I think people who do the arithmetic see that opening up that 5th wild card spot, the 5th team in each league, means you really have to win about 88, 89 games now to have an almost locked chance to get in the playoffs. 90 would have done it like 43 out of 44 times in recent times. So one of the reasons that the Nats felt like they would have future years in the playoffs, that maybe they should protect Strasburg or protect anybody, protect Jordan Zimmerman the year before, protect people in the future, is because the structure of baseball, it's not just that you've gone from 4 teams to 25% more, to 5. It's that if you do the history now, instead of saying, geez, we might win 94, 95 games and we'll miss the wild card, but there are never 3 wild cards. The second wild card, you can always get it with a pretty reasonable number. So that really opens up the future for them. And as Thom said about the Orioles, even they don't know. I was talking to their general manager, Duquette, a month or so before the end of the season. He said, just so we don't have to play Texas. So, so they get Texas and beat
All right,
them.
Tim, look ahead to 2013.
For all of Major League Baseball?
Well, you're the ESPN guy. I mean,
Well, let's just go to the Orioles real quickly just to finish the point. I don't know how they won either, but Buck will find a way for them to figure it out next year, because I sat next to him for 4 years on Baseball Tonight, and I can tell you I've never met a more prepared, more analytical, more observant person in my life than Buck Showalter. He will find the way to win, and then he will push the right buttons. The only story you really need to know about him was a few years ago when he just took over the Orioles, a 2-month period. After about a month and a half, one of his guys, who I won't mention, Josh Bell, okay, forgot how many outs there were 3 times in 2 months. So Buck finally goes to him and says, Josh, you forgot how many outs there were 3 times already. And Josh goes, well, it was only twice. And Buck said, how about the time in Kansas City? And Josh goes, oh, you saw that. And Buck looked at him and said, yeah, I saw that. And the point is, he sees everything. And they know that he sees everything. And that's why they play the way that they do, because they understand if they miss the cutoff man or miss a sign, the manager's going to be looking right at him like, really? Is this what we're going to do here? And he has taught them essentially how to win. Again, I don't know how they're going to pull this off next year, but all you Oriole fans, trust me, as long as he's in charge, this place is going in the right direction.
this question is for Jane and Kevin. Would you have shut down Strasburg?
Yes, I would have shut down Strasburg, and in case you want to know, Sandy Koufax would have done it too. I talked to him about Strasburg, you know, because the whole thing about the W in his shoulders and his motion, and everybody talking about how it's all screwed up and he's gonna hurt himself again. Koufax said that's ridiculous. His mechanics are fabulous. Don't worry about him. And I said, well, but you know, look at you. Look what happened to you. He said, you know, I played when we didn't know any better. We thought we were supposed to go out there and throw 300 innings. We thought we were supposed to go out there and pitch complete games. We just didn't know any better. Today, they know better. If Sandy Koufax had lived 10 years later, he would have been the first guy to get Tommy John surgery. He might still be pitching. You know, and the fact that they not only know better what to do with such an elbow, what to do with a shoulder, but that they know what the trajectory is in healing after those surgeries is astonishing. So, you know, you want to talk about a revolutionary moment. Sure, it's in the Nationals' interest to have him be good for a long time. Yes, they were going to take heat probably in the clubhouse as well as in the media and from all of you for shutting him down. Yes, he was going to be pissed off. He's a young guy and he wanted to pitch. That's what players do and that's how they get hurt. To have a team say, no, this is not in the player's interest is extraordinary. And it's the thing that people blamed management for years. Now they do the right thing and they get bashed for that too.
Kevin?
Despite my fanaticism for the team, I would have shut him down. I agree with everything that Jane said. And I'll go back to what Thom mentioned. You know, the fact of the matter is that there was a precedent for this. They had a paradigm they were following, and it was Jordan Zimmerman. And that's where the conversation about 160 innings came from. I can't remember if it's Chico that first wrote that or not with the Post. I can't remember who. But that's where that came from, so they were sticking to it. And quite frankly, as you were saying, no one was expecting this team to be a playoff team this year. And that's the reason this became a conversation. And then even after you get some angst about it as things are going along so well, you look at the way that Strasburg was performing once he hit that wall. And he was not the best pitcher on this team the second half of the year. The best pitcher was Jordan Zimmerman. And he was starting to show fatigue. And from what I remember talking to people in baseball about pitching injuries, they say most of them come when a pitcher is fatigued. And so the last thing you want to do is throw a fatigued pitcher out there who is the cornerstone of your franchise, and allow him to get hurt. And not hurt the arm, by the way, not the elbow, but as I understand it, the stress is on the shoulder after the surgery. So I was fine with it. I was more fine with that than having Edwin Jackson pitch.
Okay, we're going to, I have to ask Tim one quick question, and then since before the fire marshal arrives, I want to open it up for questions from the audience, and we're thrilled by this crowd. But Tim, the Hall of Fame ballots arrived today, correct? What are you going to do?
How long do we have for this?
Well, I see 200 questions coming out.
All right, I'm going to try to make this quick. This is the single hardest thing that I've ever had to do in 32 years of covering baseball, is figure out
Well,
what
you
to do.
graduated from this college, so we prepared you well.
That was easy compared to what I have to go up against the next month. I look at these guys. Barry Bonds is one of the 3 greatest hitters who ever lived. Roger Clemens is one of the 3 greatest pitchers of all time. And I'm not sure what to do with these guys. The easy thing to do is say, if you have a connection to steroids, you're out. I'm just not sure it's that easy. And I'm afraid that I will look like a hypocrite if I don't put them in. I am not comfortable as the moral arbiter here. I'm certainly not a scientist. So I'm going to sit down in the next month and try to figure out what to do. At this point, I'm leaning towards voting for all of these guys. And I don't even pretend to be right about this, because I don't think there is a right answer anymore. The other side of this, of course those points are well made. And I agree with almost everything the other side says, but there are points to be made over here, and I don't think there are any right answers anymore. And all I want to do is be right, and I don't think I can. So this is going to start a debate in the Hall of Fame that is going to rage for 20 more years at least. And I don't know where we're going with this. At some point, we're going to question the relevancy of the Hall of Fame if the top 2 home run hitters and 6 of the top 11 are not in the Hall of Fame, not to mention the greatest pitcher that most of us have ever seen. And yet, there is cheating going on here all the time. My point would be there's been cheating going on in baseball for 150 years. I am so torn on this. I swear to God, I lose sleep over this, not knowing what to do.
I'll tell you what to do.
No, it's okay. Tom, Boswell?
Yeah, I'm starting jury duty tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And we're going to be asked, I assume, to say guilty or innocent on actually sending people to prison. And I've served on juries before in the district and been on juries that sent 5 or 6 people to prison. So I think those are tough calls on beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think if I still voted for the Hall, post writers don't vote for the Hall. If I still voted, I would use, even though it's not in the what the ballot says for you to do, if I thought beyond a reasonable doubt that someone had cheated, I'd vote against them. And I would use that standard. Now, I don't think there's a perfect way. I don't think that Timmy's argument is wrong. But I would vote against Sosa, Bonds, and Clemens because they cheated, in my opinion.
McGuire, too.
And McGuire admitted it. The thing that bothers me is guys who cheated who were already great, great players. Ken Griffey Jr. and Barry Bonds were close friends their whole life. Both fathers were great players. And to me, they had a point of divergence in deciding what they were going to do. Jr. decided not to cheat, got hurt, ended up with probably 100 less home runs, and Barry, in my mind, decided to cheat. Don't think he should be rewarded with that with every record there is in the books. But that may be too harsh. I don't say it's the only answer. But
Thom Loverro, you raised
And
your
just
hand.
to finish this point, George,
Yes.
sorry. The people
It's
who
okay
say
again, Tim.
The people who
We need
say,
a couch
well,
instead of a
I'm
chair.
going to vote for Barry Bonds because he was already a Hall of Famer when he started to cheat. My friend Dan Shaughnessy of the Boston Globe points out very succinctly that if you shoot 31 on the front nine and you cheat on the back nine, you're disqualified for the entire round. So I'm not sure that you should reward somebody for playing this way, but then cheating later. If you cheat, you cheat. So I think that's the way some people are looking at it also, that it doesn't matter when in your career you cheat, a cheater does not go to the Hall of Fame.
I have to,
Very true.
I was a math major for a while, and there are equations that have too many variables to be solved. There is no answer, and this may be an equation because there's so many moral
Thom
complexities.
Loverro, you had your hand up.
I'm a Hall of Fame voter, and I see it in the opposite direction. There are 6 criteria that the baseball writers have to elect people to the Hall of Fame. 3 of them have nothing to do with statistics: character, integrity, and sportsmanship. Well, these guys, to me, I mean, Barry Bonds is an admitted cheater. He admitted in grand jury testimony that he took substances. He says he didn't know what they were. Sammy Sosa's name showed up on a 2003 list of positive tests that was leaked to the New York Times. And Roger Clemens, if you believe the Mitchell report, and I do for the most part, since the guy who brought peace to Northern Ireland is the guy who put his name on the report, I generally believe it. So to me, that is probable cause enough, because it's not a court of law, where I can decide, well, these guys are not getting my vote. Now, everybody, and people will say to me, well, you know, there have been cheaters in the Hall of Fame before, and you know, horrible character people like Cap Anson, like Kevin pointed out. Well, I didn't vote for any of them. I shouldn't be bound by every vote that's taken place before me. Mike Piazza, here's the interesting ones. It's the Mike Piazzas and the Jeff Bagwells, who hit home runs in the same era, who people might suspect of using steroids, but have never been officially linked in any way, shape, or form with that use. I'll vote for those guys.
Kevin?
Well, I was just going to say, I'll just get back to my point about Cooperstown being, you know, whether or not it's a museum or a shrine, and I think it's a shrine. And if it's going to really live up to its name and be a museum, then I think that these ball players need to be in, and I think that their role in this era and this era needs to be explained, just like the pre-1947 era needs to be explained, and Cap Anson's role in segregating baseball needs to be explained, and the fact that he refused to play against, you know, the first major league black player, Fleetwood Walker, and I think not to have that in there is what, to me, lessens Cooperstown. So I think it's, in my mind, it's imperative that these players and their story, no matter how infamous, be part of Cooperstown.
Jane, what would Mantle do?
He'd say, shit, deal me another hand.
Would he vote him in or not?
He wouldn't remember the day, George.
Yeah, he would.
No, I don't think he would. I think he actually cared about playing the game right, to tell you the truth. I say Hall of Shame. Make another wing. Put them all in. Have the whole history of PEDs, and have Bud Selig be the first person voted in with them.
Okay, questions, and we'll start, the people standing get the first shot. Gentlemen on this side.
Thank you.
Identify yourself.
My name is Larry Schlesinger. I live in Bethesda.
Are you a supporter of the financially of the Povich Center? It's a joke, Larry. It's a joke. Okay. What's your question?
Within a year from today, the Nationals will have a new manager. Who do you give me 2 or 3 names who you think should be on Mike Rizzo's short list?
I have no idea. I don't see anyone in the organization right now. I know that there's a supposed pecking order of impressive people. Who's going to be fired between now and then? Who's going to be available? How will the team play for Davey? Will the team collapse under Davey, and will they have a new manager in
Andy
August?
Reid's available.
No, I got no. When I have an insight on that, I'll write a column on it. I'm dumb on that now.
Gentleman with the Caps hat?
No, it's a playoff Nationals hat.
Okay.
Went on sale right after the playoffs.
Collector's item.
I'm Al Wilkins from Washington, D.C., and I was wondering how people thought the whole national organization dealt with Philadelphia, from the box office dealing with the Philadelphia fans and to the ball players like Bryce Harper, who retaliated the way he did against them on the ball fields.
Okay, Kevin?
Well, I'll just go back, a year or 2 years when when the strategy was to invite all the Philadelphia down here to the ballpark.
That was a Stan Kasten
Stan
deal.
Kasten deal, and I like Stan, but that was crazy. And I'm much more like this one, and as a fan, I could call up the Nationals and get some tickets or just use my lifetime baseball writer's card. But I bought tickets to the that first weekend when Philly came down, and it was great, and I loved it. And you know, one great thing about about having your team is having that rivalry. And you know, there are a lot of Philly students here at Maryland. I have some in my class, and I love to go after them, you know, after a win.
Tim,
And
why
so,
do Philadelphia fans
good.
behave the way Philadelphia fans behave?
Well, because they live in Philadelphia, I think.
Next. Yes, sir.
Mike Sauer, Silver Spring, Maryland. My understanding of the share that Masson gives the Washington Nationals of the money that they make off of showing such a quality organization is less perhaps than it should be and less perhaps than Baltimore. I wasn't sure how it all worked out in the end, but I was wondering if there's any information about that. Is Peter Angelos going to give them their fair cut?
Eduardo?
Is Peter Angelos going to give them their fair cut? No.
Tom Boswell?
Yeah. First of all, there's no deeper, darker secret than an internal baseball dispute that ultimately could probably only be resolved by Bud Selig's best interests of the game. I was shocked that in the middle of the summer I found out that there was something called a fairness committee with owners' representatives from 3 teams. I didn't even know such a thing existed. I'd never heard of it. The dispute has been before that 3-person group for months now. I think Bud's going to have to end up deciding it. Every time there is a new high standard step for an RSN contract like the $8 billion for the Dodgers, don't think it hurts the Nationals' cause. But boy, it's going to be a bitter war, and it is a good thing for the Nats that they're going to have an attendance boost. It will not hurt them. They can afford anybody that they need to sign. But God, is that going to be about Tim? I'd love to know what you think.
No, I agree with you, Boz, and I think Peter Angelos is still angry that the Nationals are here, and he's going to continue to hold them up and say, I told you I didn't want him here, and he is going to try to keep as much of that money as he can, and it's a very, very bitter dispute.
Kevin?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and you know, when I went away to college, I didn't have a baseball team because of that carpetbagger Bob Short. And so I slowly but surely adopted the Orioles. And I was an Orioles fan up until Peter Angelos started blocking the Nationals and then and hijacked the television contract and the television money, which I thought was wholly unnecessary and just evil. And it's totally irrational for me not to like the Orioles anymore simply because of what their owner did, but that's part of being a fan. So I hate the Orioles now.
Yes,
Yeah,
Tom?
yeah. There's one other thing to point out. The publicly pushed numbers are that Masson's offering $37 million a year, and the Nationals are asking for $108 million a year. An owner of a team told me that I might want to look at the fact that Masson is no doubt saying what the number would be in year 1. The Nats are no doubt talking about what the average of a 20-year contract would be. So the gap, while huge, isn't quite as ridiculous as it seems.
Eduardo, what's the thinking on your side of the parkway?
I think that, like Tim said, I mean, it's a very contentious matter, and I think that people in Baltimore, people in Baltimore don't like Peter Angelos either, and they like him a little bit more after this year, but they still think he should have signed Prince Fielder, and they still think he should go out and get Josh Hamilton and stuff like that. And I think that, I mean, there is probably a little bit of a divide there. People in Baltimore don't necessarily. I grew up in the time before the Nationals, and when a lot of people in this area were Orioles fans, and I know a lot of those people fractioned off because of this, like Kevin is saying. But I don't see Peter budging by any means. I think it is going to take some kind of third party type situation to really solve it, because it's so far apart too. So. But as far as people in Baltimore goes, I think they see it and they feel it, because like I said, they don't like Peter either.
Okay.
Can I just defend Peter Angelos here for a minute? I know this is bizarre, but
Wait a minute. We practice academic freedom here.
That's right. Stopping baseball in Washington, in Baltimore, began before Peter Angelos ever got there. I mean, it was well in practice when Larry Lucchino and Edward Bennett Williams, once he decided he wasn't going to move the Orioles to Washington. So it happened long before Peter Angelos. And nobody put a gun to Major League Baseball's head and said, you have to develop this Masson deal. They could have just put the team in Washington. Then they would have been sued by Peter Angelos. And then all the dirty secrets of the business would have come out in depositions in court. So all Peter Angelos did was protect his own interests. Baseball did not have to create the Masson deal. That was the only way to avoid a court battle with Peter Angelos.
Tom, real quick.
People sometimes wonder why baseball is so terrified of the idea of a major lawsuit by an angry owner. There has been one commissioner in charge for so long who has overseen so many franchise expansions, team switches, stadium building. Can you imagine the stuff that's gone on? And who in baseball wants a court case with somebody angry saying, and by the way, this is how Milwaukee got its stadium at 4 a.m., and this is how they got this, and this is why this vote changed at 3 a.m. So if you think that baseball acts really scared and has no courage in standing up to owners, you just have to ask, what do they know?
Gentleman sitting on the floor.
Oh, thank you. My name is Ismael Rivera, and I was wondering what your opinion is of the World Baseball Classic. Is this something that is going to develop into something bigger? We just saw Brazil qualify to be part of the Baseball Classic. So this is expanding across the world. Is this something that you foresee increasing the interest of baseball beyond, obviously, Japan, Korea, etc.?
Let's Tim have a first shot at that.
The World Baseball Classic is a really good idea for most of the countries that compete. Japan desperately wants to win the WBC every year. Cuba thinks about it from the minute it ends till the next one begins. That's how important it is to them. So it's very good, and it grows the game globally, which is very important. My only concern is the United States team all that interested in winning? And I've never sensed that the United States is interested in winning the WBC, because those guys are leaving their teams, going to report, and going away for such a long amount of time that it does not help them or their team in some ways. So once America is on board for this, it will become an even better tournament. It's a great tournament for a lot of countries, just not for the United States, not yet, and I hope that changes.
I was going to say I'm a big fan of it, partly because the former Japanese ambassador to the United States was a complete baseball nut, a man named Ryozo Kado, and after he retired from a lifetime in diplomacy, he became the commissioner of Japanese baseball. And it's enormous in Japan, and after Japan won, I wore a Japan WBC hat all summer. And It's great for baseball. It's great for everybody around the country. It's terrible for the teams in Major League Baseball who send players. And the scariest news for the Nationals over the winter is that they now have good players that are wanted for the WBC, and they have agreed to send players.
I
And
know
if you
one
wanna-
they're
you
not
wanna-
going to send,
If you want to, yeah, if you want to blow out an arm, just send a guy to pitch in the WBC in March.
Okay. Let's see. Gentleman in the hat, the W hat, the Washington Senator hat.
Fits me well. When will we find out whether LaRoche is going to sign a 2-year contract? Not if, but when will we know? And that's, of course, the linchpin for a whole lot of things happening. More playing left field, more playing first base, more playing left field, more playing first base.
Well, I talked to Davey and Rizzo about this a few days ago, and what Davey said was he loves Adam. He really wants him to come. The Orioles really want to steal him and have him play in Baltimore. Buck loves him. And Davey said this is one of those times when the business of baseball really enters into it, and he said we have got to get this decision done so we can know what it is and move on to the next thing.
What's he want?
I think
He want 4 years?
LaRoche wants to find out what the market is. LaRoche wants to go through the winter meetings and find out if he can get 4 years, $56 million, like Jason Bay or Adam Dunn. And if he gets it, why wouldn't he take it?
The Nationals do not want to lock themselves long-term in the first base. That's the years of the whole linchpin to the LaRoche thing. They would take, I think they would overpay to have Adam LaRoche back for 2 years. They don't want to lock themselves in beyond that.
And the problem, I know Tom knows, is LaRoche can only play first base. He's a really good first baseman, but he's really slow. And he's had shoulder problems, shoulder surgery, so he can't play any other position. Who do the Nats have who are promising hitters who might need to play a corner position? Anthony Rendon is either a third baseman or a first baseman if you switch him. Matt Scully, I've still got to learn how to pronounce it, 119 RBIs in the minors this year, tore up the Arizona Fall League, third baseman, 230 pounds, or a first baseman. Michael Morse, first baseman or left fielder. Tyler Moore, left fielder or a first baseman. So how can you have a guy who only plays first there for years when everybody you've got who can hit might have to end up at first base, and Ryan Zimmerman might even have to end up at first base? So you might end up doing a dumb thing, letting LaRoche go, hoping all these guys pan out and then none of them do.
Mr. Boswell, you mentioned in your live Q&A that you had more than you could fit into a column. Would you consider chronicling the Nationals next year in a book?
I'm chronicling that chat, or a lot of things in the chat. I think your best stuff. The best stuff goes into your columns, and the books I've done in the past have been collections of columns. So if I did one, it would be something like that.
Young man.
How do you think that the game 162 impacted the Orioles 2012 season?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, 2011 game.
Oh.
Got it?
Well, Ed was there. Go ahead.
Well, I was actually in Tampa that night, which obviously was the other end of it. But yeah, I think that was huge for the Orioles. I think that in a lot of ways, during the course of the season, they played it down. They played it down that it was that it played a big part in their success. But you know, like we were mentioning before, is that was their moment in the spotlight. You know, they weren't fighting for a playoff spot, or they weren't, you know. But all eyes of baseball were on them. So I think going to that experience and succeeding in it definitely helped them. I mean, you saw that, you know, how many tight games they won, how many one-run games they won, how many extra inning games they won. All of that stuff, I think, comes back to the fact that they had been through tight moments like that, moments where they, you know, the spotlight was on them, and they came out and succeeded. I know that, you know, when Robert Andino was traded a couple days ago in Baltimore, it was kind of a sad day because, you know, everyone, you know, he's always going to be kind of a part of Orioles history just because of that one night, and you know, everyone calls it the curse of the Andino, and you know, to them, there's no better way that season could have ended, because it ended, you know, under that kind of importance. You know, it ended against the Red Sox, and you know, I don't think anyone would have expected that to carry over, but I think you can definitely say that, you know, it did help. It did carry over into 2012.
Michael.
Hi, Michael King, Bethesda, Maryland. Personality aside, why do you think Mark McGwire has a job in baseball and Barry Bonds doesn't?
Let's see. Let's start with Jane.
One, he apologized, perhaps belatedly, but he apologized and he admitted at least a fraction of what he'd done. Two, Tony La Russa, his manager and pal, was in place in St. Louis and had the ability to bring him in and make that transition for him. And three, I think players actually like Mark, and they really don't like Barry.
Yes.
Given the mixed feelings about drug users being in the Hall of Fame, how does the panel feel about Pete Rose?
Tim?
About 5 or 6 years ago, I said on television that if I had a chance to vote for Pete Rose for the Hall of Fame, I grudgingly would vote for him. And about a week later, I saw Frank Robinson in spring training. And I've known Frank for a long time. And I like Frank. And Frank likes me, and he screamed at me like I was the biggest idiot of all time. I said, "What are you so mad about?" He said, "How could you vote for that guy? He violated the #1 rule, the rule that you see on a giant sign every time you walk into any clubhouse." He said, "If he gets in, I'm not going back to any function at the Hall of Fame if he's in the club." And then a friend of mine, a scout friend, Mel Didier, who was 80 years old, 85, told me if Pete Rose had killed a man, it would be less of a violation than what he did. I said, "Mel, you've got to be kidding me." And he said, "Timmy, you weren't around for the aftermath of the Black Sox scandal. If we're not sure whether the guys are on the up and up, when that ball goes through Buckner's legs, if we're not sure if he's trying, then none of this matters. You don't understand the importance of keeping gambling on any form out of the game." That's how a lot of people feel about Pete Rose. And if he were on the ballot today, which he's not going to be, he would get maybe, I'm guessing here, 50% of the vote, maybe. If it were put before the veteran players who are in the Hall of Fame, he wouldn't get 20% of the vote.
Gentleman in the corner.
George, this is a question for you. I'm Jeff Menek from Washington, D.C. You began tonight talking about Marvin Miller. And as a longtime reader of the sports pages of the local newspapers, it seems to me that the coverage of people like Marvin Miller and Scott Boras and people who stand up against management, against ownership, are, I don't want to say vilified, but the slant that I take as a reader from most of the coverage of the beat writers is pro-management and against these people who are trying to fight against the management or ownership of the local teams. Is that a reflection of there being just reporters and reporting on the team's reaction, or do you think that there is a bias among sports writers against the Scott Borases and Marvin Millers of the world?
Well, I think that the reporting is supposed to be straight down the middle, and the columnists like Thom and Tim and Kevin and Thom Loverro have a wide variety of opinions. I think, Thom Loverro, why don't you address that as far as how you try to approach your job?
Well, my only bias is for me. Or pretty much whatever works for me. And that means what's a good column? What's a good story? I know people who are not in the media, who read the papers, think that reporters are writing stories, columnists are writing stories at that moment with the idea we can sell more papers by writing this story. And that never comes up. It's the story. Is this a good story? Is Scott Boras saying something a good column? Is Marvin Miller speaking out a good column? I think that's the only bias that I've ever come across.
I'll point out that I'd like to count the number of times Bud Selig has told Tom Boswell, "I'm never talking to you again."
I had a thought when you were talking about that. The NFL was always very good, I thought, at cowing NFL beat writers and got a lot of good press out of that. Baseball beat writers tended to be more independent over the decades, with two exceptions. There were two people who were so effective in battling management that it was important to management systematically to try to demonize them at various points in the game's history. Marvin Miller was the first one, and I think it took a while for people to see that history and labor law and a lot of other basic things were on his side. And Scott Boras might be the other one, because he's been so good, and he also will tell whatever story helps his people get the most money. It's been interesting to see Boras up close, because I had heard all the negative from a distance, and I'm much more neutral on him now. I'm right in the middle on him.
Jane?
Well, you know, I covered the 1981 strike for George, and I think that most reporters back in those days anyway were kind of old fart kind of guys, and they really didn't want to be in there listening to stuff about the National Labor Relations Board. I think they just weren't that interested in the story, and if their sympathies were with somebody, it was probably, you know, get back to work because I would want to go back to the ballpark. I don't want to be stuck in the Doral Hotel for another 40 days. You know, Marvin belongs on Mount Rushmore as far as I'm concerned. And even today, in a lot of the coverage, there's stuff about what an acerbic, you know, unpleasant man he was. Well, you know, I don't think I knew him as well as you, Boz, and I probably not as well as Timmy, but I knew him and covered him. And, you know, I would listen to him tell stories like the one he would tell about Sandy Koufax, and coming to see Koufax in the locker room in St. Louis at the All-Star game in '66. Marvin had just been appointed. Sandy was at the end of his road. His arm, he said his elbow looked like he had hard-boiled eggs inside of it because it was so swollen. And his back was to Marvin when Marvin came in, and he turned around and he saw this grotesquerie. And Marvin cried. Sandy confirms it. Marvin cried. You know, I don't think Marvin was, I think his public face and, you know, on those issues were fierce and, you know, uncompromising. And we've talked about it before. You know, he was uncompromising on the issue of the union and PEDs. And I agree with you. I think he was wrong on that. But, you know, he was a mensch.
Yeah. Gentleman, right there.
I have a question having to do with center field and the comments that you've been reading about Bryce Harper then wanting to move him out of center field. The idea that it'll perhaps extend his playing time. And I can only think of one person that comes to mind where you say, well, they played center field for a long time and it took games off their career, and that was Griffey. Is that your view that center field, because everybody starts and stops, I mean, you're left field, you got to start fast, center and right. Is it your view that it really takes time off of a player's career?
I'd throw in that Davy Johnson thinks it's ridiculous to think that Bryce Harper is going to be done any damage by being in center field over the next 2 or 3 years. Now, what he'll be if he gets as big as his brother, who's 6'6", 240, if he keeps on growing, there's some point where he needs to move to a corner outfield spot, but I can't imagine it's anytime soon.
And I've always been told that center field is the easiest position to play of the three, if you can run, of course, which Bryce Harper can, because there are no stands to run into, there are no bullpen mounds to run over. A lot of times center field is better. Griffey, of course, played on turf, which did not help things. The only time it's really bad is when you're Freddie Lynn late in your career and you've got Larry Sheets in right field and Jim Traber in left field. I covered that game in Kansas City. Good call!
Okay, gentlemen, you, sir.
If we had reached baseball mecca, my name is David Stinson, if we had reached baseball mecca and the Orioles and the Nats had made it to the World Series, assuming they all had all their players, not Strasburg and not Arcadius, but they had their players, who would have won?
Okay, Jane, you
Nats
start.
had better pitching.
Nats had a better team, and the Orioles came out of a tougher league and a tougher division. I think people would have picked the Nats, but I think it would have been a hell of a series.
Tim?
The Nats have more talent. I would have taken them, but never count out Buck Showalter's team, especially late in the game, which we saw this year.
Kevin?
Nats because of the pitching.
Eduardo?
I think it depends on how many games go to extra innings.
Don't be.
Which team would have stood up to the pressure better?
Well, that's a Merrill College graduate, so I like that. Tom?
I think the Nats probably had the more talented team, would have won, but it would have been worth the price of admission to see Davy Johnson versus Buck Showalter in the dugouts.
Yes, sir.
Ron from Olney. There's a lot of writing, opinions that Davy was sort of nauseated by the prior regime's approach to hitting. Slap, wake, deep in the count, all that stuff you guys documented so well for us. In light of that, I personally, as a fan, really frustrated by Danny Espinosa and his inability to make contact. Is that fixable? Is he going to get traded in the next year or so? What are your guys' feelings about whether he's a bedrock player for the next 10 years or whether it's just not going to work out based on the fact he can't make contact?
I wish Espinosa was here to defend himself, Bob.
Davey thinks that those changes you're talking about are things that he and Rick Eckstein worked with, and that if you look at the last 100 games, he hit 265 and had the numbers you're hoping for, but with a lot of strikeouts. So they think that's what you'll see next year. I think we'll see.
Danny Espinosa isn't going anywhere. They love Danny. No. I mean, Davey on up. They love him.
And the strikeout thing is an epidemic all through baseball. We'll have 100 guys strike out 100 times every year now. There weren't 100 guys to strike out 100 times from 1900 to 1958 combined. Now we get 100 every year. Manny Lee struck out 100 times without hitting a home run one year. That's where we are now. We have guys who strike out more times in a month than Joe DiMaggio struck out in his worst strikeout season of his career. That's not to defend Danny Espinosa, but it's everywhere. Look at the box scores. We're getting 9 strikeouts a game. It's unbelievable.
And I've just got, Joe DiMaggio is the only player in history to have more home runs than strikeouts, but the guy who almost did it was Yogi Berra.
Okay.
Amazing
Sir.
change.
Can I bring it back to the money that we were talking about before? And to the University of Maryland baseball team going to the Big Ten. Is there any truth to the scuttlebutt that the reason this all happened was that the chief executive officer of Under Armour agreed to pay the $50 million exit fee, but refused to continue paying the $20 million a year athletic department loss?
Well, that stopped this panel in its tracks. I read somewhere, and you guys can help me, that Kevin Plank denied that he's going to pay the $50 million, and that the University of Maryland president has no intention of paying the $50 million. Rather give it to the Povich Center and call it a day. But that's Plank said he wasn't going to do it. Now, how it plays out in the courts, or do they have a settlement, remains to be seen. But that's the impression I get, that the Plank has no intention of doing that, and I could be wrong. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Peter Wolf from Seabrook. Talk about Davy Johnson a little bit. I love Davy to death, but in the 1977 playoffs, he did the second worst managing job I've ever seen in 60 years of following baseball.
77?
97.
Oh, you said 70.
97.
Peter, you like me, you have a problem.
No, 97.
97.
Remind me.
Well, if you
Orioles?
look under the Orioles, if you look in the dictionary under unreliable, there's a picture of Armando Benitez.
Peter, he was pretty good in 97.
97, yeah. We kept using him, they kept blowing games.
Who was
It's only been within the last few
what was
months.
the worst managing job?
Oh, Gene Malkin's with a 60.
Oh, 64.
That was the home run.
Yeah,
Remember
yeah.
the home run, Jeffrey Meyer home run?
No, that was 90. That was 96.
Yeah, but that's
I just went back over the 97 team recently to see how he ran that bullpen, and he had 3 really good relief pitchers. He had to decide, statistically good relief pitchers. He had to decide how to use who, what, and when, and he trusted Benitez to be able to carry his regular season command into the postseason, and it didn't happen.
You got to get over that. We'll talk later, okay? Me, you, and Tim will sit down and talk. Okay, sir.
Steve Weiner, North Potomac. My impression has always been that baseball has effectively found a way to be a 12-month-a-year sport. That unlike football, hockey, or basketball, and of course the media plays a significant role in that. Is my impression correct?
Well, look at
And
this
why
crowd.
is it-
Look at this crowd for a panel on baseball. You know, with Loverro and me, the highlights.
You know, David Stern is going to give a talk in Smithsonian Associates in January, and I'm wondering whether that room is going to be half empty or not. But the point is, you know, am I right about that baseball's found a way to do that, and why is that?
Well, I would think that the Wizards would like this crowd.
Hell, I paid for this.
Yes, you're right, and baseball does know why, and it's because baseball has identified that its core constituency is as a regional market for each team. Basketball can sell LeBron James to any TV market, everybody will watch him, but people in Washington and Baltimore care about the Orioles and the Nats, and so they care 12 months a year.
But there's no bigger 12-month sport than the NFL.
Right.
I mean, the NFL is nonstop. I mean, in the middle of April, when baseball season's starting, you're talking about the NFL draft.
Well,
my friends Mike and Mike on the radio were doing their two-a-days in February last year. In February, end of February, and I said, God, they're doing two-a-days for baseball. They were doing two-a-days for football at the end of February. It was unbelievable.
Gentleman
Tom's
with
point.
the white turtleneck.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you guys brought that up because I have a question.
No, put the guy behind you. The guy with the Oriole hat, sit down.
Speaking of Tony La Russa, is there anybody on the panel who would not vote for him for the Hall of Fame because he was the manager for the Bash brothers in Oakland who started the whole steroid thing? Plus, I think he's as responsible as anybody for turning 2.5-hour contests into 3-hour snooze fests, parades of relief pitchers, which he started with Dennis Eckersley specializing.
Tim, you got it.
Well, Tony La Russa is a Hall of Fame manager. The only thing I won't miss about him is every single time I talked to him for the 30 years I knew him, I would say, Tony, how you doing? He'd say, well, I'll tell you in 3.5 hours, which is when the game ends, okay? Got a little old after about 2 years. After 30 years, I finally said, Tony, you can come up with something better than that. He was a great manager. He should not be linked completely to the steroid era because everyone was involved in this. The media, everybody, managers, general managers, and this thought that some general manager or manager is going to say, I got to turn my players in here because they're cheating, when everyone on that team is cheating also. It simply was not going to happen. And again, in the lobby today, somebody asked me, if we start taking records away from players and keeping them out of the Hall of Fame, do we start taking wins away from teams and championship away from teams? Now we're in a whole different area here. It's so complicated, it's ridiculous.
Especially since the Yankees were in the Mitchell report more than any other team. So do we take all those Yankee titles away?
Yes.
I kind of thought we'd get that.
Okay, Oriole hat. Oriole hat had a question.
So you guys talked a lot about how the Nationals and the Orioles have had a lot of troubles between the two teams, and I've noticed there's a dichotomy kind of growing between Orioles and Nationals fans, especially in a place like College Park where you have people both from Baltimore and DC. So especially from Tim on a national scale, what do you see happening as far as the fan bases starting to collide with each other?
Well, I actually think it's a good thing that there are people in my neighborhood. The guy next door is an Oriole fan. The guy to my left is a Nationals fan. It's unique. Drew Storen was telling me the other day that his sister lives in Baltimore, and she loves the Orioles, and all her friends love the Orioles, and now her brother plays for the Nationals. So we got a little tug and pull here. I'm no New York expert, but in New York, you either hate the Yankees or you love them, and if you love the Yankees, you hate the Mets. Well, I don't think it works that way here, and I think it's kind of refreshing that we have Nationals and Oriole fans all over the place. And I am a little surprised, I must say, that I thought when the Nationals came back, all the Oriole fans would go rushing to the Nationals, because I thought everyone was as old as me and was here when the Senators used to play here. But as it turns out, I'm older than everybody else, it seems, and a lot of other people are here from another state. And I'm amazed how many people have stayed with the Orioles.
34 years is a long time. And if people wanted to see Major League Baseball in person, that's where you went.
Right. My son, the University of Maryland grad, grew up an Orioles fan, and so I know in my own family that he's still an Orioles fan, and he deigns to be pleasant about the Nationals, and I covered the Orioles for almost 30 years, so I don't have any trouble being friendly about them. But I feel that tension. I can feel it in him as an Orioles fan. He doesn't really enjoy watching the Nationals get better.
So you can put your hat back on. Yes, sir.
Stan from Silver Spring, proud member of the Colonnade Society here at Maryland University.
We like that.
Two things. One, we talked earlier about being a fan. Can you confirm or refute, is there cheering in the press box during games? And number two, the idea of superstition among sports writers, sportscasters.
Okay, Kevin Blackistone, let's try with that.
There is no cheering in the press box, as a rule. And it's generally, I think it's generally supported. I've never seen it in a baseball press box. I have seen it in a college football press box.
And people get thrown out, by the way, if they.
And people do get thrown out.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, your good friend William Nack is portrayed in the movie Secretariat, cheering from the press tribune for Secretariat.
It was a movie.
Well, I bring that up because when the Philly a few years ago was running for to be undefeated. No.
Fun side.
No.
Oh, okay. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Zenyatta. Exactly.
Very good.
And I was there for that, and we're all standing on the tribune, and the announcer, the track announcer, saying who's leading, and then would say, and Zenyatta's dead last. And Zenyatta's dead last. And Zenyatta's moving up. And Zenyatta's now fifth. And coming off the turn, Zenyatta's making a move. And I think that every writer who was there turned into a Zenyatta fan. And when she lost by the nostril of her snout, I think we were all let down. And that's what I wrote, that column that day was about cheering from the press box. So there are exceptions, but I've never seen it in baseball.
You never know how you're going to feel when you're covering something
Right.
until it happens. In that fifth game, when Storen gave up the hits that tied and lost the game, my actual gut level personal reaction was, it'll write a lot better this way. And that was because I had covered the Orioles from 76 to 83. I saw them blow the World Series in 79 and lose the last three. Saw them win 180 and not make the playoffs. I saw them knocked out the last day in 82. And I knew how much better I wrote about all that than I did when they won the World Series in 83. There's more depth in defeat. There's better writing in defeat. And I said, well, you're a writer.
All lies, but good story, Bob. Yes, sir.
Yeah, on the way over here, I heard the Braves sign V.J. Upton. I'm just wondering, would you think that sort of forces the Nationals' hand to expedite things with LaRoche and say to him, either you sign soon or not, otherwise we got to make a serious play for Michael Bourne?
No, they're not interested in Bourne. They're not interested in Greinke at the prices they're going to go for. They have got some interest in a center fielder. I can't find out who it is. And they definitely have to sign a pitcher or two. I don't know who that is. Don't know if it's Anibal Sanchez. I don't know if it's Ryan Dempster. I want to know, but they don't have to press LaRoche.
I believe that they were interested in B.J. Upton. I don't think they ever have any interest in Michael Bourne. I think they like Jason Worth batting leadoff, to be honest with you, and don't see any reason to import a Michael Bourne to do that.
Okay, a gentleman in the Tiger jersey. Is that a Tiger or Mets?
It's a Tiger jersey.
Okay.
This season, the debate between Miguel Cabrera and Mike Trout over who should win the MVP is one of the hottest debates ever in baseball. Do you think, going forward, that the new age statistics versus the traditionalist view of baseball is going to become a bitter war between two sides of baseball, and if so, which side do you think is going to end up winning?
Boz?
Well, I'll tell you who invented the first new modern stat in April of 1978, and he doesn't know it. George did. He came to me and he said, we need a Sunday feature. Why don't you do one of your stat things? And I did a piece called Total Average. The next year, Bill James came out with Runs Created. A guy named Bill Caudle came out with a base hit formula. 1980, Total Average went national in Inside Sports. So George doesn't know that he's the first, and I didn't know until about a year ago. That
and I didn't get a dime out of it, believe me.
And I will say that Mike Trout blew Cabrera away in Total Average because Total Average includes speed factors like steals and caught stealing and grounding into double plays. So I'm a Trout guy.
Are you a Billy Bean guy?
Yeah. Yeah, I love the new stats.
Tim?
I voted for Miguel Cabrera, and a guy said on the air that I was a complete idiot for voting for Miguel Cabrera. Now,
It's the second guy who's called you.
right. You don't have to agree with me on Miguel Cabrera, but I'm not an idiot for voting for a guy who won the Triple Crown, whose team won the division, and the other guy, as much as I like him, and I have no issue with anyone voting for Mike Trout. None. But don't tell me I'm an idiot for voting for a guy who hit 340 with 43 homers, 40 RBIs, and his team won the division, and every single game revolved around him. He's the number 3 hitter. He played 161 games. The entire defense on the other team revolved around stopping him in every game. So please, don't tell me I'm an idiot.
Who told you you were an idiot?
See, that's part of the problem of the debate here is that you've got one particular side, I think, in the sabermetricians who see this as a holy war. I mean, and they act like jihadists, thinking that if you can't see this, all this was a debate over the MVP to most people, not to them. This was the definition, this was validation for what they think is a better way of doing things. And it was just a debate over who's the more valuable player. Happens all the time.
Gentleman in the back in the dark shirt.
For the Hall of Fame voters, do you think that Kurkjian will get in? I would think he would. And is 218 wins with, I think, 11-2 playoff career win record enough wins for Kurkjian to get in? My viewpoint is 218 doesn't seem like that much. You know.
Awful lot like Morris for the Twins. Anyway.
Well, he had 216 wins, one of the great postseason pitchers of all time, one of the great strikeout to walk ratios of all time. I don't think he's going to get in the first year. I think he's right on the edge. And at this point, I'm voting for Kurkjian. And I'm voting for Craig Biggio. Got over 3,000 hits. He caught. He played second base. He played center field. He won Gold Gloves. He played in more winning games than Frank Robinson. He had more extra base hits than Al Kaline. Look at his stolen bases. Look at his runs scored. Look how many times he got hit by a pitch. Look how many times he got on base. And look at the defensive positions that he played. He's a Hall of Famer for me, and he's not getting in the first ballot because most people aren't going to look at the things that I look at.
Okay, we got time for about 2 more questions, and then the panel has agreed to sign some books that people have brought here. And yes, sir.
Mike Rizzo has gotten a lot of praise for the season. I was wondering how much credit you think Stan Kasten should get.
Ted Lerner never knew what he had there. He didn't understand what Stan had done other places, and there was just a communication block. And Rizzo is just a more blue-collar guy who gets along with Ted, who sort of came up from under. And Rizzo argues with Ted better and more effectively than Stan did. And Stan came from a rough-edged background, but he has the Columbia Law degree on top of it. And they just never hit it off. But Stan deserves a lot of credit. They're Atlanta, he still deserves credit, and the Dodgers are going to be the team the Nats have to go through for the next 10 years.
If you think Mike Rizzo is getting a lot of credit, well, the guy who hired him was Stan Kasten. It wasn't the Lerners. And when he hired him as Jim Bowden's replacement.
And he couldn't get rid of Bowden for a long time
Right.
because he wouldn't badmouth him in public, and
Right.
because Bowden wouldn't do anything in private that would get him fired
But
until
he
he
knew
finally
sooner
did.
or later he'd do something.
Well, signing a 25-year-old person as a 14-year-old will get you in trouble. Ike.
What's the latest for Brian Zimmerman after he had all the shoulder problems? Haven't heard anything or read anything about it?
Sorry. No news is good news. I don't know. Adam Kilgore, I bet, would know.
Okay, Steve?
Yeah, I had the fortune of meeting Shirley Povich, and I asked him the question, what was his most memorable moment in sports, and he said it was Don Larson's perfect game. And I'm curious what you guys would say.
Let's start with
In
Thom
baseball,
Loverro.
in baseball.
Oh, baseball most memorable? That's easy with baseball. I mean, it was Cal Ripken's record-breaking moment of Lou Gehrig. I mean, that's a no-brainer for me. I've covered a lot of great moments in baseball, but I can call on that like it was yesterday. It would be Cal's record-breaking moment.
And I would agree with that. Toronto writer came up to me in the first inning of that game, and he hadn't been around at all, and he said, "Tim, I don't get this. I don't see it. I don't feel it. I don't get it." So I said, all right, well, wait till the bottom of the fifth and then come back and tell me what you think. And after the bottom of the fifth, of course, we had this remarkable 22-minute circling of the stadium. And it was the most emotional night that I've ever spent in a major league park. And the Toronto writer came back to me in the bottom of the fifth inning after it was over, and he had tears in his eyes, and he said, okay, I get it.
Okay. Eduardo?
Well, as a growing up, Cal was definitely the moment. I remember, watching that on TV, and I was crying. I mean, growing up in Baltimore and going to Maryland and everything like that, and growing up an Orioles fan, that was huge. I mean, covering this team was probably two moments this year. Was one was covering the 17-inning game in Boston where Chris Davis pitched, and it was Chris Davis against Darnell McDonald in the 17th inning of a 105 game in Boston that turned into a game that turned to 805, and I was really hungry by the 17th inning. And they didn't have any food in the Boston press box, but so they were ill prepared. But that was just really cool. You never see anything like that, And also another moment this year that I saw was when the Orioles could have clinched a playoff berth on the field at Camden Yards, and they were watching the jumbotron of the Angels game. And I think the Angels were down to the last out, and Torrey Hunter doubled to win the game. But they're literally sitting there on the field, watching the end of the game on the jumbotron. And it's for someone who grew up in Baltimore and kind of went through that whole range of 14 losing seasons and kind of the disassociation that developed between the city and the team and everything like that. And then you had, the players literally on the field with the fans, with a sold-out crowd there, watching to see if this team was going to make the playoffs. That was pretty cool.
Okay, Kevin?
Well, I would say Chad Curtis and Royce Clayton getting into a fight over the Cisco song, Thong Song. But I don't think that's what you're really looking for. It may be when Roger Clemens finally got the record at Yankee Stadium, and his mother couldn't be there because she was ill and she couldn't travel. And I was taken aback by how he kind of mentioned his mom not being there, and you could see how close he was to his mother. And no matter what you thought of Roger Clemens at the time, I thought that was pretty cool that he would he had empathy for his mother and for all that she had done for him to get to where he finally got.
Jane?
Well, it's either Cal that night, which everybody should remember was September 27th, and it was in the midst of the Sosa-McGuire thing, the McGuire story that Steve Wilstein had broken about what he had seen in the locker was just, a month before that. And so you had these two things going on concurrently against each other, and Cal's amazing durability and reliability played out against this faux drama of, juiced up guys, has a particularly historical resonance for me. I guess for a game I covered, maybe Reggie's 3 home runs, Yankee Stadium.
That was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Tim?
I think the '86 playoffs between the Red Sox and the Angels, Game 5, was the best baseball game that I've ever covered. That was the Gene Mauch going to the World Series game, the David Henderson game, the Donnie Moore game. It was still the best baseball game I've ever seen. And my wife went to that game. We were newly married pretty much. Somehow she got into that game. Not a big baseball fan, so she asked me after the game. She said, "That was a pretty good game, wasn't it?"
Tom?
The '86 game was great, and then we had to fly back coast to coast to pick up the last 2 games.
I sat next to Boz for the '86 playoffs against. Sat right next to him, just like now.
That's a lot of others.
That's really interesting, Tim.
I had time to think, and it's not even close for me. My best game actually took almost 40 innings, and it was the 4-game comeback by the Red Sox against the Yankees from down 3-0, and I, of course, covered the whole series. When they were down 3-0, I got a call from a lifelong Red Sox fan who's a good fan, and the only thing he put on my answering machine was, "Boz." Then he gave his name, and he said, "They killed my father, now they're coming after me."
Well,
so I thought of him through the whole last 4 games. And my father-in-law pitched for the Red Sox up to AAA, born in 1920, never seen him win. And I remember calling him in the 7th game to see, is it okay, are you okay now, that they finally buried the curse. And so I remember that phone call.
Well, my favorite is 2005, when the Washington Nationals returned to the major leagues, and I wouldn't have to either edit, read, or do anything about a story of another team coming to Washington in the 33-year absence, in which you wrote a lot of them as well. So that's my favorite. All right, I'm not going to end this yet, but because there are too many people here with questions. Who else has a question? Yes, sir. White shirt. White shirt. You're too young.
This is Virginia.
Hi, White shirt.
My name's Ross Natoli. I coach baseball at Catholic University, Washington, D.C. We have the privilege this year of probably seeing the most amazing year a 19-year-old has ever had at the major league level. You probably know another former 19-year-old better than anybody in this room, or maybe better than anybody. Could you compare and contrast? Could you compare or contrast what you know about each of Mickey Mantle and Bryce Harper?
I think Bryce Harper is Mickey Mantle without the knee injury. You're talking about center field and whether he can play it, like Mantle. Harper didn't grow up as an outfielder. He outruns things just the way Mickey did. I think the drama that he brings to every play, every at-bat is incredibly reminiscent of Mantle. You just didn't know what was going to happen when Mantle came to the plate. It could be good, could be bad, it could be horrifying in terms of what injury might befall him. I can't remember a player with that kind of innate drama since Mantle. Can you guys?
I love the parallel. Is Strasburg Koufax? What does Koufax think? Did he talk about that?
Koufax, I did not ask him that. I can. Would you like me to go ask him that? Okay, I'll go ask him. I can call him right now.
That's how we get this stuff. Will you ask him?
Is Strasburg? Strasburg's been pitching since when? Remember Sandy Koufax didn't start pitching really until he got to the University of Cincinnati, where he was not a scholarship athlete. He walked on, as a matter of fact, as a basketball player. And he only started pitching because the baseball team was going to New Orleans over spring break, and it sounded a hell of a lot better than going back to his parents in Brooklyn. Sandy is somebody, you talk about pitchers and their arms. He barely threw before he became a Brooklyn Dodger, and he barely threw the first 6 years of his career as a Brooklyn Dodger. Alston didn't like him, Alston didn't use him, And Alston had a little the anti-Semitic stuff going on there too, as a matter of fact.
But Strasburg probably threw as little as any pitcher of his generation. He wasn't recruited. He didn't really blossom until he was in college. I never spotted that parallel before.
But he played through college.
Yeah.
And you know, question with Koufax, was Koufax, would he have burned out earlier if they'd actually used him? Or did he last as long as he did because they didn't use him? Or did he not have a chance to build up, you know, the arm strength? One thing's for sure, he left it all on the field. That last game of the '65 World Series, which he pitched on 2 days rest, and fourth inning, John Roseborough, his catcher, went out there and said, "Sandy, you're not throwing the curveball." And every time he put down the figures for the curveball, Sandy would shake him off. And he said, "Sandy, you're not throwing. What are you going to do?" And Sandy said, "Well, we're going to blow him away."
At that, what a perfect way to end a wonderful panel. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled at the attendance, thrilled you came out. I want to thank our panelists, Tom, Boswell, Tim, Jane, Kevin, Eduardo, Tom. They're going to stay. I know some of you brought books that they've written that you want them to sign. They'll be glad to do that. Again, this was wonderful to have you all come out, and thank you very, very much. The Povich Center, thank you.